are recorded for those who may not be able to attend the event today. We'll send everyone a link to the recording after our event. So drop us a note, make sure we have your email address and contact information so you get a copy of the recording. We are taking questions throughout the event, so please drop them to us in the chat window as soon as you think of them. I want to introduce our expert panelists who have joined us today. First, we have Biren Jajal. He's an account executive with Acronis Cloud Services. He has over 25 years experience in the backup and disaster recovery, virtualization, enterprise storage space. Biren served as a disaster recovery specialist with Acronis for over 8 years. He regularly engages with helping partners build disaster recovery practices as part of their offerings, managed service offerings. And he helps customers establish disaster recovery strategies for critical workloads. We also have with us Howard A. Miller. He's the Senior Vice President and Director of Tech Secure Division with LBW Insurance and Financial Services. Howard's been successful in cybercrime insurance product development, speaking and educational presentations. He's been published in the Journal of Applied Business and Economics. He's a board member for the nonprofit Secure the Village. It's an information security and educational outreach program. And also the Pepperdine Graziadio Business School of Cyber Risk Professional Certificate Advisory Board. And then finally, we have with us Cody Cooper. He's the Chief Information Security Officer for Diamond IT. Cody's one of the many veterans that we're proud of that work here at Diamond IT after spending his time serving in the 82nd Airborne Division of the U.S. Army. He brings his understanding of security from the military to all of his IT jobs, but he's got numerous network and server and security certifications, extensive experience, along with the very prestigious CISSP, that's Certified Information Security Systems Professional. That makes him a really sought-after cybersecurity expert. So we appreciate everyone being here, panelists. Just a little bit about Diamond IT. We're a security-focused managed services provider. We're also a Microsoft Gold Partner. We were founded in 2005. We have offices both in Bakersfield and in Northern LA. And we're really proud of our associations with groups like Vistage and Evolved Peer Groups. Our memberships in these groups, they help us constantly improve and mature our services and offerings. We share ideas with other like-minded organizations, all with the common goal of being a best-in-class provider. We are on that Secure the Village Leadership Council. We take a great deal of pride in educating the business community, and that's why we do these kind of events. And we hope that our guidance today and our efforts to educate can just make the business community a safer place for everyone. My name is Jeremy Meehan. I am the Chief Technology Officer here at Diamond IT. I'm going to kind of moderate and facilitate our panel discussion. We also have with us Matt Mayo. He's the CEO of Diamond IT, and he'll help answer any questions we have in chat. So what I want to do right now is I want to stop my presentation here, and I want to turn it over to the panelists, to our panel here. And I want to maybe ask, if Biren, if you can get us going here, kick us off this morning. Can you speak to some of the elements, that you should pay attention to when you establish a disaster recovery plan to help reduce downtime and data loss?
Sure, I certainly can, and it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. There's a number of elements to establishing a disaster recovery plan for any business. Typical process in establishing a DR solution or plan. It's really a 6-step process. The first is to do an asset inventory that identifies all your hardware and software assets. That's just from an IT perspective. The second step is to do a risk analysis. And the risk analysis is really going to figure out how threats and vulnerabilities affect those assets to create potential risk for the business. And examples of threats, could be power outages, hardware failures, catastrophic natural disasters, and examples of vulnerabilities could be ransomware attacks, software updates, insider threats, theft. So it's just kind of looking at how these threats and vulnerabilities intersect with those assets to create risk for the environment. And disaster recovery is all about reducing risk so that you can minimize your downtime and data loss in the event that some of those things happen. So once you've identified the risks, it's really just kind of going through a process of analyzing those risks, evaluating the potential impact, what the tolerance for the business is in relation to those risks, and then how to control those risks. So that second step, I think, is one of the most important of the 6-step process is creating that risk analysis. And the risk analysis is just going to go through, again, those risks. Who does the risk affect in the organization? Who are the stakeholders? What existing controls exist, are in place to manage those risks? What are the gaps as well? And then kind of going through and categorizing those risks in terms of what is the impact to the business, what is the tolerance for that risk, and what steps you can take to kind of mitigate that risk, and who's going to own that process. So this whole thing depends on it's a common practice through any size business, but that risk analysis is important. But once that risk analysis is done, then you can go through a business impact analysis, and that's really just going to look at your recovery point, recovery time objectives. That's again your RPO is just how much data loss is acceptable to the business, how much downtime. Our recovery time objective is just how much downtime is acceptable to the business. So looking at RPO and RTO, for each of the server workloads. And you might have certain servers that are, related to inventory control, or others that are related to order processing or invoice management, whatever it may be. But kind of taking a look at each of those and figuring out what is the appropriate amount of data loss and downtime that is acceptable to the business. And then looking at what, and the way to kind of figure that out is to really figure out what the business impact is. And that sort of, kind of ties into the next step, which is really the downtime cost analysis. So a lot of businesses don't really necessarily know what their downtime cost is. And a quick way to figure that out is just to take the total revenue for the business divided by the total working hours. And that gives you a dollar figure that you can use. If you do a little deeper analysis, you'll be able to figure out what it is for your specific business. But these 4 steps that I just talked about, the asset inventory, the risk analysis, the business impact analysis, and the downtime cost analysis, are kind of the preparatory steps in developing a disaster recovery plan. Once you've gone through that process for your business, then you're in a better position to kind of decide which disaster recovery strategy is the best for you. We're real strong advocates of disaster recovery as a service, which is basically, being able to back up and replicate your data to the cloud and leverage that and just spin up your servers in the cloud in the event that you have a failure. The advantage of that approach versus a do-it-yourself, build your own approach is that the infrastructure is already made. It's elastic. It's it's available. It's on demand. There's often it can be accessed through a SaaS application, through a web browser, and it's got some orchestration capability in there to make that whole process of failover very easy. So these are the typical steps. And then once you have a solution in place, the critical thing around disaster recovery preparedness is always is that preparation piece, right? So being able to test that plan on a regular basis, whether it's quarterly or 2 times a year, or just at least annually, knowing all the steps that go into that process, having tested it, and that testing process is an iterative learning process as well. When you test, you learn, how you did in the plan, what things you need to improve, and then you incorporate those learnings into that improvement, and then test again and again. And then you also learn, how to manage the communications, both internal, externally, if the DR event could potentially affect your vendors, your customers, how to manage and control that communications and rehearse all of that as well. So these are, from my estimation, sort of the basic steps in establishing or the thought process in establishing a disaster recovery plan.
Sure. So, I mean, identifying your priorities is obviously a big first step. And if you have a plan, if you don't test it, I mean, whatever plan goes right the very first time, right? That iteration is certainly helpful to make sure we've tested and exercised things, because we don't want to lean on it and have it be there and then not ever really work because we didn't test it.
Absolutely. Yeah. The testing is super important.
Very cool. And,
and it's all about preparedness, right? It's it's kind of like they say, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure, right?
Sure, yeah.
The disaster recovery planning process is all about prevention. and being prepared. So if you can go into that event well prepared, and having thought through all the scenarios, and the disaster recovery planning process, it sort of parallels as well to the cybersecurity planning process as well. In the disaster recovery planning world, it's risk analysis. In the cybersecurity world, it's threat modeling. But it's all about figuring out what the risks are, and then having a plan and being well prepared to understand the impacts of those risks and how to respond to those so quickly, having that incident response team. And I think the DR planning team as well should include members from all parts of the organization, not only the senior executives of the organization, so there's executive sponsorship, but also the IT folks, both the administrative folks as well as the cybersecurity folks, because unfortunately, cybersecurity threats, ransomware attacks are on the rise, right? They're happening every 11 seconds. And then, so going through the threat modeling on the cybersecurity side, and then, the risk analysis on the broader DR side, just helps you have that plan in place so that you can respond to that threat. And unfortunately, there's been lots and lots of those examples. Most recently was the Kaseya example, the ransomware attack, and the Colonial Pipeline and hacking organizations. So all of these organizations are affected. So this is a super important, I think, relevant topic, and I encourage every organization to go through this process, even if it's not, don't have dedicated folks. Just go through that process of establishing some kind of DR strategy for yourself, so you're prepared.
Well, I love how you talked about risk, and what I want to do is I want to maybe have Howard join us for a second and talk about, as you understand some of that risk. Howard, can you help us understand, the exposure of ransomware from an insurance perspective, and what someone might need to consider when they're getting and keeping cyber insurance?
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for having me. I'm going to share a few visuals as I talk about this. So just a quick disclaimer here. This is not legal advice or guarantee of insurance coverage, but I think one thing that's really critical to understand, and Baron was talking about this risk management cycle or process, which I think is absolutely critical. And when you look at this from an insurance perspective, and you go back to what he was talking about as far as assets. Now, I would call them exposures. It could be operations, people, or other assets. It's something of value that is exposed to loss by a peril or a cause of loss, and hazards or vulnerabilities and threats come into play there. So there's two sides to cyber insurance, and it really helps to understand this from a first and third party perspective. So a car is a valuable asset to protect, but it can also create a liability when it causes property damage or injury to a third party. Your data is intangible property, and it's extremely valuable for your business. And because our society is based on interconnected cyber-physical systems, a cyber attack affecting your data and disrupting your operations can also affect third parties, including the confidentiality of your client's information and their operations if they rely upon you. So I want to talk about the Colonial Pipeline event. And so this happened on April 29th, not too long ago, and hackers found a password to an unused VPN account where they gained access to Colonial Pipeline's network. The account did not have multi-factor authentication, and from a report I received as part of the Society of Automotive Engineers G32 committee, that Colonial Pipeline's billing system was affected. And Colonial Pipeline suffered first-party losses, including financial, operational, reputational, 100 gigabytes of information, and less the amount that the FBI recovered, about 2.1 million in ransom that they paid out. From the third-party perspective, this included the thousands of people that were affected by the gas shortage And on May 18th in Georgia, a class action lawsuit was filed. And it basically alleged that the owners acted negligently in employing lax cybersecurity standards, and that the company breached its duty to employ industry security standards, and the failure translated into system outages that harmed consumers by raising prices at the pump. And that, you can see, you've got a third-party liability creating a lawsuit, and you have first-party damages to the organization itself that was hit by the ransomware attack. One of the things I think is important is like looking at a cyber attack before, during, and after. And from an insurance perspective, you know, these are services, but working with a company like Diamond IT and implementing awareness or phishing training, dark web monitoring, online cybersecurity education. Some of the insurance companies are doing a good job there with some resources, and vulnerability assessments that can help identify weaknesses in your architecture. This can be really important prior to a loss to mitigate those. So going back to the phishing training, we all know many of these losses are triggered by clicking links, opening attachments, or falling for impersonations. So we need to reinforce our awareness and test our ability to identify these increasingly sophisticated threats. One of the things that we've been doing is matching up through risk analysis and helping our clients identify cyber risk priorities, and then in turn, seeing how the insurance policy with affirmative coverage language matches up to those risk priorities. And it's also important to know that before you have a loss, these insurance policies have obligations. And if you want to preserve your rights under the policy, you need to be aware of when and how to notify the insurance company. And this should be part of your incident response plan. So during the attack, insurance is providing a breach coach. So if you've got customers, they could be in various states or countries, you're dealing with a diverse regulatory scheme. We have new expanded statutory damages with the California Consumer Privacy Act. Of course, it started with GDPR. And so leveraging the insurance company to work with you in the event of a claim to get that sophisticated legal analysis. And of course, myself and as a broker, we're always advocates for our clients during the claims process. And finally, I would add that one thing that policies have evolved is providing what's called betterment coverage, meaning they're willing to pay for security assessments or other control activities to actually improve your security posture to avoid a future loss. And we've actually worked with Diamond IT with our clients, and we've got the insurance company to pay thousands of dollars towards a security analysis and in improving the posture of the client post-breach or post-ransomware attack to actually be more resilient. Because you know, we were talking about the amount of cyber attacks that are taking place, and really what people are looking at now is not necessarily, you know, it's not a perimeter defense. It's they're going to get in. The question is, how do you resolve it? How resilient are you, and how quickly can you recover? And so the other thing is to look at, you know, your organization holistically. There are certain attacks that can not only affect your data, but can affect physical assets, or in some cases cause people to be injured. So you want to look holistically at your risk as well as your insurance program. And if you do have a loss, you want to tell a story. You want to show how you've improved and what you've done to minimize future attacks. So that's a little bit from my perspective on how I would answer your question, Jeremy.
Thanks, Howard. I think a lot of people, as we're talking about, you know, risk and loss, it's not just about the loss of business or of revenue, the outage. I think you're also dealing with, like you said, that's all the first party stuff. It's the third party, especially in California, CCPA, secondary losses are things that the insurance can really help us with. Cody, I know we come across many organizations and they think that, they're safe because they've got backups. I've heard that before, as we're talking to prospects. I've got backups, I don't need insurance, or I don't need, to have a good cybersecurity posture. And that's not the words they're using, but I think it's what they're saying. Can you help explain why backups alone won't save a business or an organization from a cyber attack?
Yeah, absolutely. And, like everyone else, I want to thank you for letting me join you guys, letting me out of my dark cave to come into the sunlight. Yes, so having backups is great. And that's definitely probably the major priority when it comes to disaster recovery, right? And then everything else kind of falls from there. Insurance will kick in. But as Howard was sort of alluding to, there's a lot more that can happen whenever you get some sort of incident that backups themselves won't fix. So one of the examples that Howard gave was actual liability, whether that liability is something that can be litigated against you, or it can be physical. For example, if you're a company that provides some sort of safety service to a municipality, for example, like the city, and you end up getting hacked and someone gets hurt because they can't get the response that they need, right? So a backup won't solve that problem. And I've also seen things where, for example, with the recent California Privacy Act, where almost all data that is encrypted by ransomware is also exfiltrated outside of the company. So that data that you have, that private information of your customers or your citizens or whatever, is now somewhere on the internet. So now you've not only been brought down from ransomware, but now you have a privacy issue that potentially could cause you to violate those privacy acts and go be under investigation by the federal or state government. Backups won't protect you against that either, right? You can also look at things like reputation. If your business is something that has to do with social media or has to do with health or has to do with anything where people are aware of what happened, are they really going to want to do business with you again? Imagine being a financial institution and you get hacked. Do people really want to put their money back into your organization? So just having backups is important, but it's not going to save you from all the other fallout that comes from some sort of incident, whether it's a ransomware incident or something like Byron was saying, or it's just Mother Nature, a tornado or whatever. Backups are really only that. They're important, but they're definitely not the only piece you want to look at.
Well, I also know that we commonly see that threat actors are targeting backups. So having sometimes backups alone, without that like Viren said, that pound of prevention, relying on just that recovery, expecting to get hacked or to get attacked, and then having the recovery is different than trying to prevent the recovery by having a good security posture anyways.
Absolutely. That's actually the MO you will see of most threat actors. They will go inside your system. They will remain hidden until they find your backups. Once they've taken your backups out, then they will unleash the ransomware and everything else. More often than not, they will hit those first.
Yeah, I would like to add something. The insurance companies are not only paying for direct loss, but also indirect. And I would call that net income. So it's kind of like a domino effect. First you have a ransomware attack, then your operations go down, and now you can't function. So consider, manufacturing, e-commerce, professional services on billable hours. All these things are going to add up cost as the time goes on that you can't recover. So the insurance companies are looking for clients that understand this and have taken that preventive step and analysis and are protecting those backups so that they can recover quickly, which would minimize the loss of profit and extra expenses involved in a ransomware attack.
Yeah, we've recently had two customers with travelers insurance policies, the cyber insurance. And both of those policies are now requiring multi-factor attestations, right? That an organization has to have multi-factor authentication turned on, not just for email, but also for desktop. So I know a lot of these insurance carriers, the requirements of their policies and even insurability is certainly increasing.
Yeah, that's a great point, and something that the participants of this webinar should be aware of is that when you make those statements or warranties, that application material becomes part of your insurance contract. And if you're not complying with that, and you said you were going to do MFA and you said you were going to do certain things and you actually didn't, that could be grounds to deny your claim. So you want to be careful and follow through on what you're saying and what you're representing, so that you preserve your rights.
Yeah, that's very important. That's actually one of the things I look at often for our customers, to make sure that we're following what the insurance contract says.
So, Byron, I know we talked about earlier a little bit about the disaster recovery, but can you talk about, I guess, what a successful business recovery looks like? As you're maybe speaking, you can explain the differences between having just backups and having a real disaster recovery solution.
Yeah, sure. Well, as mentioned, it's important, super important to have backups, right? And a typical sort of best practice in terms of backups is like what we call the golden rule of 3-2-1. So having 3 copies of your data in 2 different locations. Rather 3 copies of your data. One's primary, and then 2 backup copies. One in locally, and then 1 in offsite location. Typically, the offsite location is going to the cloud, and backups are, of course, important for your day-to-day restores, whether it's single files or even helping you with, a ransomware attack from a restoration perspective. It takes time. So the main difference, though, between backup and disaster recovery is typically the purpose. There's a significant distinction between the two. So backup, again, is more about data loss avoidance, and disaster recovery is more about high availability and replication to minimize downtime and data loss. And so, backup is typically going to use cold storage, and disaster recovery is going to use a warm or hot storage. And disaster, backup could take, hours or days, and disaster recovery it's really about minutes, right? And having an orchestration plan that's well, that explains or outlines all the steps in the recovery process. And then it's really about high availability of those critical applications and workloads. Typically, the DR site is going to be standby. So it's not just the copy of the data, but it's the copy of the data with the compute and RAM resources with that workload ready to go and spin up within minutes. So it's all about, again, evaluating recovery point, recovery time objective for the business, determining which workloads are critical out of those. And not all workloads are going to be critical, but critical server workloads, for example, that might be related to order processing or inventory management, or you might be part of a supply chain. The organization might be part of a supply chain, so it's critical to have those workloads up and running very quickly. And a good DR strategy is going to help you basically identify those workloads, be able to pick a point in time snapshot and spin that server up very quickly in the cloud within minutes. So and have that whole process be available through a web browser and orchestrated as well, so that with a click of a button you can actually activate all your servers and just resume. It also, I think that disaster recovery, at least in the context of disaster recovery as a service, I mean, you can deploy a DR strategy in multiple ways. Some people think of DR as, I've got my copy off site. But a real DR strategy is where you can spin those servers up, the critical servers up, very quickly. And that can be accomplished either through a backup replication technology, or through a virtualization replication technology, SAN-based replication. There's a variety of ways to accomplish this. It can be a do-it-yourself approach. But like I said, we advocate the DR as a service approach. So that's just taking your backups, replicating them to the cloud, being able to spin all that up very quickly from a backup snapshot, usually within 5 to 7 minutes, and orchestrating that whole process. And I think DR as a service in particular democratizes DR quite a bit. It makes it accessible to even small, medium business customers, because, small, medium business customers can't afford to have a duplicate data center with duplicate infrastructure and a whole DR team and staff. They need something that's ready-made, that's scalable, that's available on demand, that's got the orchestration component built in. It's got a console that's available. And so DR as a service type of solutions, which we deliver in conjunction with Diamond IT, can easily address that and make establishing a DR strategy very accessible and easy at a very cost-effective rate for even a small, medium business. Even a customer that's just got one server can spin up a server very quickly and be back up and running. And so those are some of the distinctions between I think backup and disaster recovery. And why we think that it's important to have not just a backup solution, but also a DR solution, really for any critical workload.
It's important to note that, you have to ask yourself, how long can I afford to be down? Can I be down for a day or for a week or for a month to recover from any kind of disaster or cyber attack or outage, right? And then the second piece is how much data can I afford to lose? Can I lose an hour? Can I lose a day? Or if I lost a month's worth of data, what would that mean? And what kind of impact would that look like? And so, we want to make sure that successful backup and recovery, options, cover, people's tolerance for downtime and so data loss.
And that's a super important question. I mean, a super important thing as well, just determining the recovery point, recovery time objectives. I've been in the backup and DR space for like 27 years, and I used to do these DR seminars in one of my prior employers, and I'd have a room full of IT folks. And one of the things the first question I'd ask is, if you were to go ask your CEO how much downtime and data loss is acceptable, what do you think he'd say? And, everybody would chuckle because, of course, the CEO always wants zero. It's not possible to do zero necessarily, but most small medium businesses, default to a backup solution, typically take their data offsite, and that's their sort of, sometimes that's their DR strategy. That's where they end. And so I always encourage IT folks to have that discussion, have a business level discussion, and it protects you, right? It's all about protecting you as the IT person. I had to because at some point or another, something could happen, right? And you want to be able to have your strategy established within the organization with the executive, so the expectation level is correct. So, and if it's not correct, maybe the CEO of the company wants to make sure that there's minimal downtime and data loss, and now he can allocate the budget and funding to make that a reality for your organization. Or maybe he's okay with 24 hours or 48 hours of downtime data loss, whatever it may be. But having that internal discussion, getting it in writing, getting an agreement, both from the business and IT side, is super important. And the main question really there is, what is our recovery point, recovery time objective for the business for these critical workloads that support the business? If we can establish that, at the executive level and have that agreement between IT and executives, then you've got the first step to kind of making sure that solution and strategy is in place to support the business goals.
Absolutely. So, considering from a backup perspective and that solution set, and factoring in your insurance coverages and what you would do in a situation, an incident response, Cody, from the IT and security perspective, can you speak to what some of the tools and resources that Diamond IT provides that might help an organization quickly recover from a ransomware attack?
Yeah. One thing, so the whole point about security is it's about layers of security, like an onion, right? If you want to get to the middle, you have to go through all these outer layers. So we do very much the standard things. We have firewalls, that we have email filtering to make sure that your ransomware doesn't get in through the email. We have all of these sorts of things that I think most IT companies or IT departments ought to have, and generally do have, I've seen overall. And usually what I find is it stops at some sort of antivirus, like they will have Microsoft Defender or whatever antivirus they have, and then they have some policies in place, and then they have a firewall, and then they have their backups, and that's good, and they feel secure like that. Unfortunately, that's not quite enough anymore. And I want to paraphrase this or emphasize that it's affordable to have security. You don't have to necessarily break the bank in order to have more security than just that. I think often departments will stop there, or organizations will stop there because they don't want to spend any more money on it. But the problem is, A, you really need to these days, but also B, it's not nearly as expensive as you think it is. Some of it is just policy setting. So for example, what we do for every single one of our clients is we make sure that the user data is not saved on the local machine. We make sure that user data is saved on a server. And then from there, with FireEnd services, we make sure it's then remotely pushed to the cloud. And that's a very simple step, but a lot of people, for some reason, they don't do that, and they leave their customer data or their employee data on local machines, and they never push it off anywhere else. So that's one of the big things that we do. Because if you recall, I talked about how threat actors will target your backups first. Well, they're going to target the local backups. They can't access the backups that are in the cloud in Washington or Arizona or whatever. So we make sure when we can that all data that's important or that's critical is always pushed offsite as well. And that's just a very easy step that I see a lot of departments or a lot of organizations skip. Beyond that, you often see sometimes people will advertise things such as OneDrive or Dropbox or ShareFile. We utilize all of those for customers who like to have shared data between their organizations. Again, that data is pushed outside of the local environment. It's routinely backed up by by large infrastructures. So we do things like that, of course, but we also don't just stop at antivirus. We utilize, I would say, a bit more advanced tools that we deploy, one of which is a SOC service that we have, a SOC being Security Operations Center. We have people who are monitoring environments 24/7. When we see things that seem odd or seem out of place, we immediately are notified by a person on the phone. And I've woken up or interrupted dinner for more than one business owner to give them the news and say, hey, I really need you to be aware of this, and here's what we're going to do to fix it. And then, so we have that service that's constantly monitoring and looking for things. We do logging for all of our customers in terms of if things seem out of place, if there's people who are trying to log on with bad passwords multiple times. So we look at more things than just an antivirus would. And then on top of it, we utilize advanced security tools such as SentinelOne, which not only look for things that may be out of place, but also take snapshots of all of the folders and all the files, so that in the event that ransomware does happen, we can just instantly roll it back. And one of the reasons why that's so important is, remember earlier when I said backups won't necessarily save you from all of the fallout, whether it's litigation or it's regulation or what have you. Things like our tools like SentinelOne will enable us to roll back that ransomware before it becomes a bigger problem. So imagine a machine getting ransomware, say through email, and then it starts to spread to say 2 other machines. Well, we can isolate those machines. We can make sure that they lose internet immediately so it can't spread. And then we can roll back those files so that ransomware is actually reversed in a way. And when I say reverse, it's the easier way to explain it, but it's not quite that easy. But that way, you don't have to necessarily call insurance because it was only a 15-minute incident, and you don't necessarily have to recover from backups because, again, it only lasted 15 minutes and we were able to immediately get in there and fix it. I'm not going to guarantee that everything will save you every time you get hit by ransomware, but we make sure that we take every reasonable step we possibly can so that we've done our due diligence and no one is negligible. So it's very much a whole layer of onions, and those are the layers that
extra layers, yeah, make a huge difference. Very cool. Well, what I want to do is I want to kind of transition here as we're kind of wrapping up. I want to thank everyone, for attending, but also thank our panelists here for being here today. We always appreciate, your thought leadership, things you guys bring to the discussion. We're going to keep the discussion going here in just a minute. We're going to open up the mics in our chat for a little Q&A. But just for registering and attending our event today, our discussion today, we want to offer everyone a chance to win a VIP experience to the Acura Grand Prix. Cronus is offering us up some experiences we can share. So give us a shout out in chat, send us a quick email, let us know if you want to be entered in that drawing. That drawing is scheduled for, I think, the end of August, but the 2021 Acura Grand Prix of Long Beach, September 24th through the 26th. It's expected to operate at full participation, full fan experience, so it's kind of a cool thing to get back. But there may be some restrictions due to COVID-19, obviously with things we can't control. Please give us a shout out, send us a message or an email so we can enter you into the drawing. And I'm going to pull the Q&A slide up here real quick. I can drop our email addresses in the chat, but I want to open things up and see if anybody has any questions for our panelists, any topics they'd like to discuss. I'm going to turn on everyone's microphone. You have to unmute yourself in order to ask our panelists any questions, and maybe Matt or Cody can help us monitor the chat just to see if we get anything in there.
Yep, absolutely.
I think we should have most of our mics turned on. Howard, while we wait, are there any advantages, of your services? Certainly make sure you find the right insurance carrier, the right insurance broker that has a specialty in cyber insurance.
Yeah, I think there is, and I believe that it's important for executives to understand their risk priorities and start to look at things in terms of risk scenarios and how do those match up with your actual insurance language. And I think when you do that, you're providing better due diligence for the board and the C-suite, and you're focusing in on what your priorities are. So I think that's really important. The other thing that is important is we saw with the SolarWinds attack that we rely on third parties, and then we find out that they're the cause of an operational shutdown. where they pass an infection to you, even though they're kind of a trusted vendor. And now you're responsible for that damage. So cyber supply chain risk is becoming more and more critical as we realize that we're all digitally connected. So verifying that, and well, in a lot of cases, companies are going to be asked to verify, because of this situation, what their insurance is and how it's going to respond to a contract or a breach where it could cause damage to a third party. And if you have vendors, you need to understand how their insurance is going to respond and how they're going to indemnify you based on contract if they suffer a security breach, which in turn impacts your organization. So I've had a lot of experience in matching insurance requirements with contracts and analyzing and even helping vendors get insured properly. So those are some areas that I think are becoming more and more important that I've been addressing with my clients.
Yeah, I think having that specialized knowledge, that specialty certainly helps, right? I love to say, when we're sick, we go to a doctor, and we need financial advice, we have advisors. But if you need, IT and cybersecurity, that's what you want to hire a company like Diamond IT, or cyber insurance, a specialist like Howard. There's a reason why we have the backgrounds and the training and the education to really deliver these services at a high level. That or we could look up WebMD and try and self-diagnose, right?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. Right now, I think it's all hands on deck. And the insurance industry has suffered a loss ratio increase of 30 to 40%. So for every dollar, they're paying 30 to 40% more out than they're taking in, and that's having an impact. So it's no longer a soft market in cyber insurance, and it's really about working with the right partners and having incident response, doing risk analysis, and mitigating those risks. And we talked about Byron talked about this cycle of putting in controls. So first you want to identify and analyze your exposures and the impact that those are going to have on your organization. And then you come up with some priorities. Then from there, you want to do what you can to control the risk. If you can't avoid it, how do you minimize frequency, reduce the severity, or contractually transfer it? And how are you going to pay for it? And that's where the insurance comes in as a risk transfer vehicle. And then the final stage that's really important, and this takes top-down leadership, is you got to implement and monitor these plans and programs. Because if you don't, you could basically be negligent for knowing what you should have done and then failed to do it. So you've got to follow through, and then periodically you need to go back and reassess. So it's about having the right team.
Absolutely. I've got a question here in chat from Aaron, and I want to pose this to both Cody and to Howard, because I think you guys both have a piece of this. But he's asking, do we have any ideas for a little company, a smaller company, has a very large data set for networking, storage, applications, and hosting? And of course, obviously being cost conscious, trying to make sure that things are affordable. Howard, what kind of suggestions would you give Aaron to deal with those kind of challenges?
I guess I would ask, is this a technology company or a non-technology company that just has a lot of information?
We'll see if Aaron can jump in here and give us either off mute and
I turned my mic on. Can you hear me now? This is Aaron Bird.
Aaron, nice to meet you. Joining us.
Yeah, nice to meet you guys. Yeah, we're a technology company in a way. We are land surveyors, and we do a lot of 3D laser scanning, 3D modeling, and so we have just multiple terabytes of data that we're dealing with. We do large drone flights and aerial photogrammetry, so we have heavy processing of this data. And I'll just give you a quick Cliff Notes version of what we're doing right now. I have stacks of little external Seagate hard drives all over my office with all of my data on it. And it scares me to death every night that I go home and I think about the the thousands and thousands and thousands of projects and terabytes and terabytes of data that are just sitting on these little external hard drives, and we move things around our office to 4 or 5 different desktop computers to do all of our processing on those computers. And it's just a nightmare. And so again, we're a startup. We're about 2 years into this business, but we just have tons and tons of data that we need to store, we need to back up, and we need to be able to work, my preference would be for us to be able to work on a server that's sitting over here in a server room in a closet, instead of having to copy all that data down onto a local desktop hard drive to work on. That would be my dream. But again, I understand that's, that kind of stuff is expensive, and we are teeny weeny, and our budgets are tight. So I'm just looking, for somebody to just say, hey, here's the best idea for you, and here's realistically what something like that's going to cost. And I know this could be an offline discussion after this webinar, but ideas is just kind of what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I'm gonna field this one real quick because I get all excited with all kinds of fun ideas for how we could tackle some of your challenges, and know that, good backups and good security doesn't have to be inaccessible for small businesses if they have tight budgets. So I certainly think we have options and solutions to address both security and backups, but also some of your storage issues and needs. I'd love to set up a call or a meeting where we can maybe go through some of your requirements and prioritize them, and talk about what it would look like to have an on-prem server or a cloud server, replication, lots of things that we could probably do to get those hard drives, off of your physical desk. The time to, mean time to failure for those hard drives. I've had more USB drives fail on me in my career in IT than I care to count on. So love to see if we can set up an offline call. I think we can probably help you with all of those challenges and concerns.
Yeah, that'd be great. I would definitely look forward to that.
Jeremy, I do want to chime in real quick, though. One piece that I think a lot of people forget is security is 3 things, right? It's the acronym CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And it sounds like part of the problem is not just the fact that they have all their data on small drives and can fail at any moment, but they also don't really have availability. Because if you need to pull up that data at any point in time, you have to either find the right drive, or the person has to go across the office to get it, or whatever. By moving that data to some sort of centralized system, whether it's on-premise or off-premise in the cloud somewhere, you're actually increasing your security by a few different factors. One, you're guaranteeing the integrity. Shouldn't say guarantee, but you're increasing the integrity by putting it on some sort of redundant system. But you're also increasing the availability of that data. So if you take the 5 minutes that you waste every time trying to find that data, and you multiply that over a year, how much more productive can your company be when you have that data as an increased availability data set? So definitely different things to think about there too. It's not just where to put it, but also it might even make you more profitable in the long run.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will add that we do have a cloud, we're using Google Drive. So we have Google Suites, and we do have data stored up there, but, copying back and forth 400 and 500 gigabyte file set.
Yeah.
I'd rather that be doing that automatically overnight while I'm asleep.
Yeah.
And have that data accessible in my office,
Yeah. Also, the job sounds really fun, by the way. Flying drones around to map stuff, but that sounds great. Matt, if you could give me a drone, please, I'd appreciate it.
I would add, from a third-party liability standpoint, the California State Attorney General says that if you have over 500 records that are unencrypted, you need to notify the State Attorney General's office. And so you want to consider the ramifications to your clients as far as the sensitivity of this information. And I would suggest that if your data is encrypted, you're in a more defensible legal position. Now, that can sometimes slow down the operation of the data, but maybe it's more accessible if it's encrypted in the cloud and in transit. So that's something to talk to Diamond IT about. The other thing, that as a startup, you don't have a big budget. but then you can't afford to lose a lot either. And by simply having a cyber insurance policy, you've got a whole team of experts. So if you had to do a forensics analysis at $400 an hour, the insurance company already has that on retainer to respond to you. So utilizing the insurance policy as part of your kind of incident response resources could be really valuable to you. And finally, I would recommend that you consider your professional services and how that ties into your cyber risk, because you're kind of providing a service that the general public doesn't really have advanced knowledge of, and that's why they hire you. So your liability as a professional should be taken into account as part of your insurance program, and then tying that with your cyber insurance. So those are my thoughts.
Great, thank you.
I really want to thank all of our panelists for joining us. I don't see any other questions here in chat. Let us know. Kick off your mic. Give us your questions, or and if you have anything following our event here today, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a slide here that has all of our email addresses on it. Remember to drop us a note so we can get you entered into that drawing for those Grand Prix tickets. I'd love to see you come join us for that VIP experience.
I'll be there for sure. Right up my alley.
I think Cody and I are going to Rochambeau for the extra ticket, right?
You're not supposed to tell anyone, but yes, and I will win.
Okay. We can arm wrestle.
Well, you might win then.
All right, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us today. We'll go ahead and wrap up our call and let us know. We'll get you a copy of the slide deck or the recordings.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
For attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.